Subscribe our YouTube channel for latest material and PTE tips and tricks. Best luck for your exam.
Medicinal tablets are nothing new. Doctors have been dispensing pills for thousands of years. And now archaeologists have turned up some of those ancient medicines, which were preserved in a shipwreck for close to 2 millennia. The 2nd century Pausina wreck was discovered in 1974 off the coast of Italy. Its cargo included medical equipment like a cupping vessel, iron probe, and 10 boxes of supplies. And in one of those boxes, researchers recovered 5 grey tablets. Now, they've analyzed the antique medication. The work is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The pills primarily contain zinc compounds, probably the active medicinal ingredients. But researchers also detected starch, pollen, charcoal, fats and linen fibers. Those fibers helped the kids today may be more familiar with the sound of a rushing highway than a rushing river. But imagine that the internal combustion engine could be set aside and we could design the soundscape of our future. What oral environment would you choose for traffic? For the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the answer is that new cars should sound like old cars. Hybrid and electric vehicles can be so quiet that people outside the vehicle can't hear them. So these 2 quiet cars will be required to sound something like this. The Obama administration wants 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2015. Slow sales of cars like the Chevy Volt and Tesla Model S may keep that number from being reached. But there are still hundreds of thousands of EVs and hybrids on the road today. It's hoped that the new rule will help prevent thousands of pedestrian and cyclist deaths. But the rule also hews to a possibly outdated tradition, like people who set their cell phone ringtone to sound like an old rotary phone. And it's wasting a chance to reimagine what our cars, roads and even cities could sound like. When you don't clean your plate, microbes feast. And Americans are awfully good at feeding microbes, wasting some 222 million metric tons of food a year. That's a quarter of our food. Much of that wasted food ends up in garbage dumps, turned by microbes into methane, a powerful greenhouse gas and one of the primary culprits behind global warming. Now government officials in Massachusetts would like to ensure that restaurants, universities, hospitals and other large institutions don't exacerbate that problem. The idea is to make sure all that wasted food doesn't end up in landfills but instead becomes either compost or energy. The same microbes that turn food into methane in a landfill can turn food into methane in a biodigester, and that methane can then be used as a fuel. More importantly, from the Bay State's perspective, it will keep the state's landfills from filling up. Of course, the methane from landfills can also be harvested, and often is. And, as the Pilgrims knew, it would be even smarter not to waste the food in the first place. But let's give thanks for another helping of new ways to curb climate change. An Arctic storm tore a drilling rig loose from its tow ship and forced it aground near Alaska's Kodiak Island this week. Just a few months ago, the rig and another began preliminary drilling of the first offshore oil wells in the Arctic. Shell's efforts to drill in the Beaufort and Chukchi seas have been plagued by problems. But that's just part of the cost of doing energy business in this new era. Consider drilling rig operator Transocean, which agreed to pay the U.S. government $1.4 billion this week for its part in the disastrous 3-month-long blowout in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. Meanwhile, the thirst for oil drives the mining of tar sands in Alberta and the flooding of old wells with steam or CO2 in California and Texas. And, of course, there's the accelerating accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere from all that fossil fuel burning. The resulting climate change is part of what makes drilling for oil offshore in the unfreezing Arctic possible, just as it has opened once mythical shipping routes such as the Northwest and Northeast passages. That's a positive feedback loop with negative consequences. Sharing is one of the hallmarks of human behavior. Give me a cookie and I'm more likely to give you one later. But our bonobo cousins have an odd variation on the practice. They share with strangers before friends. The finding is in the journal PLOS One. Researchers tested bonobo sharing in experiments involving 14 of the apes. All were born in the wild. In the primary experiment, bonobos were placed in a cage with food, and they could choose to admit either a known member of their group, a stranger, or both. In 51 trials, most bonobos shared the feast, but they let the stranger in first. Why choose an outsider over a friend? In another experiment, the scientists found bonobos only shared when doing so led to a social interaction. Giving up some food to strangers lets these apes expand their social network. This behavior may have evolved to promote social tolerance, in contrast with chimps' sometimes deadly aggression against strangers. Which means that even when food is offered, there's still no such thing as a free lunch. Ultraviolet rays don't just bronze sunseekers on the beach. Underwater, they can give hammerhead sharks a suntan. And worse, give fish skin cancer. So says a study in the journal PLOS One. Researchers caught 136 coral trout in the southern Great Barrier Reef. 15% of them had black lesions on their skin, melanoma. Pathogens, toxic chemicals or UV rays can all cause melanoma. But DNA tests ruled out the presence of pathogens. And the fish were caught in the pristine waters of a marine sanctuary, so pollution wasn't to blame. Turns out, the trout's cancer cells looked just like those of fish who'd been hit with UV radiation in the lab. So the researchers concluded that sunshine was the culprit. Makes sense, they say, because these trout live near the world's biggest hole in the ozone layer, meaning more exposure to UV rays. Another recent study, this one in the journal Science, says the severe storms delivered by climate change could punch new holes in the ozone layer, upping our dose of radiation on land and at sea. And that's no fish story. Being physically active has numerous benefits. Now a study has looked closely at the effects of fitness in the midlife years for preventing debilitating chronic diseases later. The ongoing study gathered fitness stats for more than 18,000 adults, and followed their health status into old age. Assessing 40 years of that data, the analysis finds that those who had higher fitness levels in their 30s, 40s and 50s were substantially less likely to have a chronic condition between the ages of 70 and 85. The findings are in the archives of internal medicine. Physical fitness seemed to stave off heart disease and heart failure, which might not be a big surprise. But it also reduced rates of diabetes, kidney disease and even Alzheimer's disease. Current recommendations suggest adults make time for at least 20 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity a day, such as fast walking, jogging, biking or swimming.